Dear colleagues, good afternoon. We have here the heads of the government, the envoys of the president in the federal districts, and the heads of the Russian regions. We are meeting under difficult circumstances when our armed forces carry out special military operation in Ukraine and in Donbass. I would like to remind you that in the very beginning of it, early in the morning on 24th of February, I openly, publicly said about the goals and objectives and the reasons of the actions of Russia. It is helping our people in Donbass that almost for 4 years, by barbaric means, by blockades, large-scale punitive activities, by terrorist attacks, and by constant artillery shelling, we're really suffering from actual genocide. And why? Only because they wanted some basic human rights given to them, to follow the laws and traditions of their ancestors, to speak their native language, to raise their children the way they want to. And the Kiev regime didn't just ignore or torpedoed the implementation of the Minsk agreements throughout all these years. In the end of the last year, they publicly renounced to implement these measures. And they started implementing the roadmap of joining NATO. And the Kiev regime was also saying about their desire to have their own nuclear weapons and the means to launch it. That was a real threat. In the foreseeable future, with the technical help from abroad, the Kiev regime could have a weapon of mass destruction in their hands, and the objective of this regime would be Russia, obviously. In Ukraine, there was a network of dozens of laboratories led by and financially supported by Pentagon, and they were carrying out military biological programs. They were experimenting with the strains of coronavirus, anthrax, cholera, African pig plague, and other deathly, lethal pathogens. And now they are trying to mop up the evidence of this program. But we have every reason to believe that next to Russia, in Ukraine, next to Russian borders, they were basically creating components for biological weapon. And our numerous warns that such developments poses direct threat to the safety of Russia. They were rejected by Ukraine and by their patrons from the US. And they did it in a very brazen way. So we have exerted all ways to resolve the matter peacefully, the problem that occurred not by our fault, and in this regard, we were forced to launch this special military operation. The Russian troops near Kiev, near other Ukrainian cities, has nothing to do with our intention to occupy the country. That's not our objective. And I said that directly during my address on February 24th. As for the tactics that was devised by the General Staff, by the Defense Ministry, it justified itself completely. And our fellows, our guys, soldiers and officers, they prove to be courageous and brave. They do everything that depends on them to avoid casualties among civilians in the Ukrainian cities. I would like to say, for the first time in the very beginning of the operation, the Kiev authorities, via different channels, we were suggesting not to have any hostilities, but to withdraw the troops from Donbass to avoid the bloodshed. They didn't want to, and that was their decision. And an understanding of what is happening in real time on the ground, they will come to this understanding. The operation is unfolding successfully in strict accordance to the plan that we have devised. And Ukraine, prompted by the United States and a number of the Western countries, they were preparing to this armed scenario, to the ethnic cleansing in Donbass. The large-scale assault on Donbass and Crimea was just a matter of time. And our armed forces, they undermined these plans. They prevented these plans. In Kyiv, they didn't just prepare for war against Russia, against Donbass. They have started this war a long time ago, and they were trying to start terrorist underground there. For years, they continued hostilities in Donbass. They were shelling civilian cities and towns. Almost 14,000 civilians were killed, children among them. On March 14th, as you know, they launched a missile on downtown Donetsk. That was a terrorist attack that killed more than 20 people. And such shelling are continuing for days. They aim without any discrimination. All the squares, like fascists, during the last days of their resistance, they want to drag into their graves as many civilians as possible. But what is utterly cynical, not only the blatant lies and statements and claims that it was Russia that launched a missile in Donetsk, but more cynical is that the so-called civilized Western world, European and US media, they didn't even notice this tragedy in Donetsk, as if it didn't happen. And that's how they were looking away for the last 8 years, when mothers in Donbass were burying their children, when they were killing elderly people. That's a degradation, moral degradation. This kind of torturing of people in Donbass, we couldn't tolerate that anymore. To put an end to this genocide, Russia recognized People's Republic of Donbass. We signed an agreement on assistance and friendship. Based on this agreement, republics went for military help to Russia, to help them, and we gave them this help. We had no right to do otherwise. And I would like to draw your attention to the following. If our troops were only acting in the People's Republic, we could have liberated our land. That wouldn't have been the end of it. It wouldn't have brought peace or eliminated the threat for Russia. But no, we would have a new front line along the borders of Donbass. They would have continued shelling and provocations, and this armed conflict would have been endless, because there would be revanchism and hysteria from Ukraine, and the NATO military structures would have been deployed even faster and in more aggressive fashion. We would face the fact that the lethal weapons of the alliance would be at our borders. Once again, I would like to say that we had no other way to defend ourselves, to ensure the security of Russia, other than launching special military operation. And all the objectives of this operation will be achieved. We are going to ensure security of Russia and our people, and we would not allow Ukraine to become a stronghold for aggressive action against our country. It is a principled matter for Russia, for the future of our country, about neutral status, about demilitarization and denazification of Ukraine. We have been ready. We are ready now to talk about it, to discuss it. Our country did everything it could to have these negotiations, to organize these negotiations, because we understood that we should have every chance to save people's lives. But time and time again, we get convinced that the Ukrainian regime that got the task of creating aggressive anti-Russia, but they're Western patrons. These Western patrons, they don't care about the fates of the people. They don't care that hundreds of people are dying, that millions of people are becoming refugees, that people who are holding hostages by neo-Nazis or delinquents released from the prisons, they don't care about this humanitarian catastrophe. And it is obvious to us that these Western patrons, they are pushing Kievan authorities to continue this bloodshed. They are getting supplied new weapons, they are getting intel information, and they are getting other kinds of aid. They get military instructors and mercenaries from abroad. And they choose economical, financial, trade and other kinds of sanctions against Russia as their weapon. And European and American people are getting hit by these sanctions because the price for gas are growing, for food, the jobs are lost because of these sanctions against Russia. And you shouldn't put the blame on anyone else. You shouldn't accuse our country about everything. I want ordinary people from the West, hear me. They try to convince you that all these difficulties that you face is the result of some hostile actions by Russia, that you have to pay out of your pocket to fight this alleged Russian threat. That's a lie. And the truth is that the current problems that millions of people in the West are facing is the result of many years of policies perpetrated by the Western leaders, Western states. Their mistakes, their ambitions. These people do not think about improving the lives of their own citizens in the Western countries. They are obsessed with income, with their own profits, with their own interests. And we have data from international organizations that show that social problems, even in the leading Western countries, have exacerbated in recent years. There is more inequality, there is a bigger chasm between poor and rich. We see more and more racial and ethnic conflicts. This myth about Western society, about this so-called golden billion, is getting destroyed. Now the entire planet has to pay for the ambitions of the West, for their attempts by any means to preserve their domination in the world that is slipping away. These sanctions is the consequence of irresponsible policies of the central banks and the governments of the US and the European Union countries, because they have increased this inflation and it increased the inequality. And we have more and more refugees, influx of refugees all around the world. And who is going now to be responsible for the millions of the starving people in the poorest countries of the world because of the deficit of foodstuff? A heavy blow was dealt against the global economy and trade. The trust for the dollar was undermined. And this illegitimate action to freeze some assets of the Central Bank of Russia, now crossing out the so-called first-class high-rate assets. Both the US and EU basically announced the default regarding their obligations towards Russia. Now everyone knows that any assets could be basically stolen at any moment. And seeing that, many countries in the near future could start, and I'm confident that's how it's going to be. They are going to convert their digital and fiat assets into raw materials, into land, into foodstuffs, gold, or other material assets to increase the deficit in these markets. It will increase the deficit. And arresting these asset accounts of the companies, of individuals, it's a good lesson for everyone, because you should invest in your own country. And I have said that on many occasions, because despite the pressure by the US and their vassals, I would like to thank the companies that continue to work in our country. In the future, they will get additional opportunities to develop. And we also know those who betrayed cowardly their partners. They forgot about their responsibilities towards their clients and towards their employees. They just wanted to get some alleged dividends by joining anti-Russian campaign. And unlike foreign states, we are going to respect their properties here. And I would like to emphasize, we need to understand clearly that the new package of sanctions and restrictions against us would have followed at any case, under any scenario. Our military operation in Ukraine is just an excuse for the West to impose new sanctions. Yes, now they are more concentrated. But that's how it happened after the referendum in Crimea. That happened on March 16th, 2013, 8 years ago, when Crimea people, Sevastopol people made a free choice to rejoin their historic homeland. We are talking about mere excuses, about containment policies, about making Russia weaker via economic isolation and blockade. That's a long-term strategy of the West. And the leaders of the West are not even hiding that the sanctions are aimed not against companies or certain individuals. They want to deal a blow on our entire economy, on our social, humanitarian areas, on every family, every citizen of Russia. These steps are taken to make lives of millions of people worse, and that can be called an aggression via economic, political, information means. It's a total war, blatant war, and so-called Western Vermont, they are not shying away from saying that directly. All these words about political correctness, about private property, about freedom of speech, in a moment it all disappeared. Even Olympic principles were trampled upon. They even wanted to deal this blow against Paralympians using this kind of approach, this kind of policy. In a lot of Western countries, a lot of people are getting harassed against just because they are from Russia. They are being refused to give medical care. They are losing jobs. They forbid Russian music, culture, literature. They want to cancel Russia. And now we can see the true face of the West. They are showing their true nature. And we can compare it with anti-Semitic pogroms perpetrated by Germans in 1930s. And they were trying to... A lot of European countries joined the Hitler aggression during the Great Patriotic War against our country.
There's a massive attack going against Russia, an unprecedented information warfare that involves global social media and all Western media outlets, whose independence and their unbiased status turned out to be a myth. People's access to information is being blocked. People are being fed fakes, false stories, false narratives. One of the Western social medias directly said that they encouraged publications calling for the deaths and killings of Russians. We understand what kind of power that empire of lies really possesses, but against truth it has no power. Russia will continue to show our position to the world. Our position is open and clear, and more people share our view. Let me say quite frankly, when we hear these hypocritical claims by our Western partners, they are in fact expressing openly their hostile stance towards Russia. They don't like Russia. They don't want Russia to have an independent course, independent development. They don't want us to protect our independent interests and values. We all remember how they supported terrorists and in Northern Caucasus in the 90s. And now, like back in the 1990s, they are trying to pressure us down and turn us into a dependent, weak nation, to destroy our territorial integrity, to break us apart. They failed before and they will fail again. Yes, they will continue to try to use the betrayers in the nation, the traitors, the national traitors who make money abroad and who make money in Russia or live abroad, and people who have a mentality of slaves, who have villas in Miami or in France, who cannot help themselves but they cannot live without gender freedoms or luxurious foods. But these people mentally are not part of Russia. They are not ideologically part of the Russian people. They believe themselves to be a higher race, a higher caste of people. They are ready to betray anyone and anything to be allowed by their masters to sit alongside them with the higher-ups. But what they don't understand is that those masters, their puppeteers, don't really value them. They only use them as tools to damage and attack Russia. The collective West is trying to break apart Russia, speculating on our military losses, speculating on the repercussions of the economic sanctions they imposed on us. They're trying to start infighting within Russia. They're using these traitors within Russia to destroy Russia, to break Russia apart from the inside. Any nation can discern between real patriots and these traitors. And when we find these traitors, they will be cast out of our society. And this is a way to strengthen our country, to strengthen our solidarity, to make us united and ready to answer any challenge. And the West are actually seeing us as people who are just like themselves, but we are not like that. We are not just about material things, about money, and we do not want to serve them as our masters. This is the path that many people in Europe have chosen. But Russia will never choose to be humiliated like that. We will continue to protect our sovereignty. We will continue to fight for the future of our people, of our children. And we will continue to fight for our right to remain Russia. And the bold actions of our soldiers is a testament to that. They continue to protect our motherland. Ladies and gentlemen, clearly we can see that the events that are developing right now are a conclusion to the model that we have seen in the world over the past decades, a model that has been imposed on the world. Let me emphasize once again that over half of the world's population do not share the willingness of the West to punish Russia. And the people who don't support the West are those who represent the most promising part of the global economy. Yes, it is difficult for Russians right now. Huge businesses, even small and medium businesses, are facing unprecedented pressure. It was our banking system that was the first to face the attack from the West, but they held their ground. They continue to operate and work with all Russians. The next wave of sanctions was supposed to trigger panic in the financial sphere, but in the past week there was a huge demand for goods, over 1 trillion ruble worth of demand, and all of the economic actors worked together to prevent panic and work together. I'd like to express my gratitude to specialists, to banking experts, and to everyone who helped protect our economic system and who laid the foundation for the future of our economy. I'd like to especially note our central bank, our Ministry of Finance, our municipal officials, everyone who in these trying times continued to solve all these problems, address all these challenges. It is clear now that this economic blitzkrieg failed. They weren't able to crush our economy. We have seen difficulties and challenging times before, and we will carry on now, and we will overcome all these challenges. We will continue to improve and increase our sovereignty, redirect funds towards our industries, our agriculture, our residential construction. We will continue to develop foreign trade ties and continue to cooperate with foreign markets. Of course, this will require deep structural change in our economy. And let me be frank, these are going to be difficult times. They will lead to greater inflation, to greater loss of jobs. But right now, our goal is to minimize all those risks, and the government will continue to carry on with its obligations and protect and help all Russian people, especially mothers, especially families with multiple children. Starting April 1st this year, children from 8 to 16 will receive special benefits, especially in families with smaller incomes. And these payments will be 0.5 to 1 minimum subsistence wage. So, with all these measures, we will help mothers who are just waiting, who are just expecting children, pregnant women, and they will continue to receive benefits after the child is born and over the next years. So whatever difficulties a family may face, this family will receive help, financial aid from the government as quickly and as efficiently as possible. Also, I urge the government to develop measures and policies to protect people who are losing their jobs. We know that the income of people is being critically hit by a rise in prices. That is why we will continue to increase all the social benefits, including pensions. The minimum wage and the subsistence wage will be increased. Also, I would like to ask the government to do the calculations and come up with specific numbers. By the end of this year, we still have the goal to reduce inequality and poverty. This is a priority task for Russia. This is also an issue of social justice and social equality. Much of this burden now lies on the municipal heads, and they will have a lot of work ahead of them. The governors and mayors will need to make specific decisions to support our people based on the situation on the ground in each region, in each part of our country. This approach will help us take stock of the situation everywhere in Russia and adapt. This is exactly the way we organized our fight against the COVID-19 pandemic, and I ask all the municipal heads to coordinate their efforts with the heads of regions, and these heads of the regions must spearhead the work toward this economic recovery. And the key role in overcoming these economic issues would be private businesses. It is private businesses that can restructure their logistical routes, find new vendors, and restore and restart the production of goods that the people need. And depending on that, we will be with the help of private businesses, we'll be able to restore the growth of our economy. And so, when we face this outside pressure, we must face it and respond to it with ensuring maximum freedom to our entrepreneurs. I would like to ask the governors and heads of regions to remove various obstacles and regulatory obstacles that our businesses may face, including inspections. One of the key problems for our enterprises right now is the deficit of various financial tools and the problem with with loans, with accessing loans. I would like you to address this issue as quickly as possible, and in this regard, I would like you to to increase the advance funds given to financial institutions up to 6 months. These decisions must be taken at the level of regions and at the level of government-run businesses. Secondly, entrepreneurs must have the chance to draw additional resources. I'm talking about the practice of state financing and investment financing. The Industry Development Fund is a good example of that. It's a good instrument. The Small and Medium Businesses Bank is another good example. The Regional Institute